I kept it to myself for a long time, but it's time to tell. It wasn't a dramatic revelation, not some explosion of truth that shattered my world in an instant. No, it was slow. A creeping realization that slithered into my mind like a whisper in the dark. A detail here, a hesitation there, a scent on her skin that didn't belong to me. I should have seen it sooner. Maybe I did, and I just refused to believe it. After all, love does that to a man. It makes you blind, makes you stupid. It wraps you in warmth and familiarity until you stop noticing the cold creeping in through the cracks. But last night, everything changed. Claire had kissed me when she came home, her lips soft but hurried, her voice carrying that practiced exhaustion. Work was crazy, she had sighed, tossing her bag onto the couch. I'm so ready to just collapse. I nodded, pretending not to notice the slight smudge of lipstick on the inside of her wrist. The same shade I had watched her carefully apply before she left that morning. The one that was now slightly faded, like it had been kissed away. I should have confronted her then, should have grabbed her by the wrist and demanded to know where she had really been. But I didn't. Because the truth was, I wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, I had watched her slip into our bedroom, heard the water run in the shower as she washed away the remnants of him, whoever he was. And I sat there, staring at the blank television screen, knowing that after tonight, nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't sleep. Claire curled up next to me like she always did, her body fitting against mine as if nothing had changed. I kept my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe, feeling the weight of her deception settle onto my chest like a brick. At some point in the early hours of the morning, I made my decision. I wasn't going to ask. I wasn't going to yell or plead or cry. I was going to find out everything, down to the last filthy detail. And when I had the truth in my hands, I was going to make sure she regretted every single lie. I needed proof. By the time Claire stirred beside me, stretching lazily in the golden morning light, I had already gone through her phone. She thought she was smart, that she could keep it locked away with a passcode, but she forgot that I knew her better than she knew herself. Her password was our anniversary. She probably thought it was sentimental, a trick to throw me off, but it worked in my favor. The messages were there, buried beneath the surface, hidden under an innocuous name in her contacts, Ava. There were no long, romantic declarations, no guilt, no second thoughts, just short, direct messages, each one a dagger to my chest. See you tonight. Same place. I can't stop thinking about last time. He doesn't suspect a thing. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. There was no denying it now. No excuses she could give, no explanations that would make this go away. Claire wasn't just lying to me. She was laughing at me behind my back, slipping into another man's bed while I was here, waiting for her like a fool. She stirred beside me, murmuring my name, reaching for me with sleep-heavy fingers. I turned to face her, forcing a smile, shoving the anger down so deep that she would never see it coming. "Morning," I said, brushing her hair back from her face, my touch gentle, my voice steady. "Sleep well?" She smiled, still half asleep, and nestled into my chest like she had done 1,000 times before. "Yeah," she whispered. "You?" I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, wondering if he had done the same just hours ago. "Never better," I lied. This wasn't over. Not even close. I played the part of the devoted husband. I kissed her goodbye that morning, held her waist a little longer than usual, let my fingers brush against the curve of her back as if I were savoring her, drinking her in. I wanted to see if she would flinch, if guilt would crack through her carefully constructed facade. But Claire, ever the actress, only smiled up at me like nothing was wrong, like she wasn't slipping through my fingers. "Love you," she murmured, pressing a quick kiss to my lips before grabbing her keys. I watched her walk out the door, her steps light, effortless. It made me sick. She thought she had fooled me. She thought she was untouchable, but she had no idea what was coming. The moment the door shut behind her, I moved. I went straight to my laptop, logging into the shared account where our phone bills were stored. She had never been cautious with things like that because she had never needed to be. Claire had spent years building trust, planting the seeds of comfort. She thought I would never check. She was wrong. The number labeled Ava showed up dozens of times over the past few months. Calls, texts, sometimes for hours late into the night, sometimes just minutes before she walked through our front door. I wrote it down. I wanted to call, wanted to hear his voice, to listen to the sound of the man who had touched my wife, who had kissed her, whispered things to her that were meant for me. But not yet. That wasn't how this was going to go. Instead, I traced her routine. Claire wasn't reckless. She was predictable, a creature of habit. She went to work at 9, had lunch at the same little cafe 3 blocks away, came home around 7. The only deviation was Wednesday nights, her so-called yoga class, which meant tonight, I would follow her. The day passed in a haze. I went to work, took calls, sat in meetings where words blurred together in meaningless drivel. All the while, a slow burn built inside me, bubbling just beneath the surface. By the time evening rolled around, my hands were steady, my mind razor-sharp. Claire kissed me before she left. I kissed her back, tasting the lie, and then I followed her. She drove across town, not toward the gym, but to a hotel. Small, discreet, tucked between office buildings where no one would look twice at a car parked outside. She didn't hesitate. She walked in like she belonged there. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached, watching the entrance like a predator in waiting. I didn't need to see more. I had my answer. But still, I waited. 30 minutes passed. 40. An hour. Then, finally, movement. The door opened, and she stepped out, hair slightly tousled, her lips redder than before. And behind her, a man, tall, confident, the kind of guy who had never second-guessed himself a day in his life. His hand brushed her lower back as they walked to his car, a touch so casual, so practiced, it made my stomach churn. She kissed him, right there in the parking lot, like our marriage didn't exist, like I didn't exist. And then she got into her car and drove home, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just ripped my heart out and left it bleeding on the pavement. I stayed there long after she left, long after the man had driven off, staring at the place where they had stood, burned the image into my mind. And I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to be the fool in this story. Claire thought she was in control. She thought she was the one pulling the strings. But now, the game had changed. By the time I pulled into our driveway, Claire was already inside, moving through our home like nothing had changed. Like she hadn't just walked out of a hotel room, fresh from another man's bed, and come back here to pretend she was still my wife. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, forcing my breath to even out. I had seen everything I needed to see. The kiss, the way she touched him, the way they moved together like this wasn't the first time, like it was routine. I could have stormed inside right then and confronted her, could have grabbed her by the wrist, made her look me in the eye, and demanded to know how long she had been feeding me lies. But I didn't, because this wasn't going to be a screaming match. It wasn't going to be an argument where she cried, gaslit me, twisted her words until somehow, someway, she was the victim and I was the villain. No, I was going to do this my way. I walked inside, forcing a smile as I kicked off my shoes and shrugged off my coat. The scent of dinner filled the air, something warm and familiar, as if this was just another night in our perfect little marriage. Claire stood by the stove, stirring a pot of pasta, a glass of wine in one hand. She looked up when she heard me, her lips curling into a smile so sweet, so effortless, it made my stomach turn. "Hey, baby," she said, walking over and pressing a soft kiss to my cheek. "How was work?" Work. As if I hadn't spent the entire day unraveling her secrets. "Same as always," I said, my voice steady. "What about you?" She sighed, rolling her shoulders as she turned back to the stove. "Exhausting, I swear. If I have to sit through another one of Rebecca's endless meetings, I might actually lose my mind." I watched her as she spoke, the way she so easily wove fiction into reality. There was no hesitation, no flicker of guilt, nothing that suggested she had spent the evening with another man before coming home to me. "Yeah," I murmured, stepping behind her, pressing a kiss to the back of her neck. "You sure you weren't somewhere else?" She froze, just for a fraction of a second. It was brief, but I caught it. The tightening of her fingers around the wooden spoon, the slight pause in her breath. And then, just as quickly, she relaxed, laughing softly. What? What kind of question is that? She turned, smiling up at me, amused. Where else would I be? I shrugged, tilting my head. I don't know. Just wondering. She searched my face for a moment, but I kept it unreadable, kept my voice light. And after a beat, she relaxed again, turning back to the stove. She thought she was still ahead of me. She thought I was clueless. I sat down at the dining table and pulled out my phone, opening the camera roll. The photos I had taken earlier that night stared back at me. Claire, stepping out of the hotel. Claire, kissing him. Claire, betraying me with a smile on her lips. I looked at her now, laughing, pouring me a glass of wine, chatting about her day like nothing had happened. She had no idea, and that made this so much better. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to make her feel every single ounce of betrayal she had poured into me. And by the time I was done, she would regret ever thinking she could play me for a fool. I sat across from Claire at the dinner table, watching her twirl pasta around her fork, completely unaware that the man sitting in front of her was no longer her husband, not in the way she thought. The weight of the truth sat between us, an invisible presence, thick and suffocating. She chatted about her day, about work, about a funny story one of her friends had told her. Lies, all of it. And I played along, nodding in the right places, laughing when I was supposed to. She thought she was safe. She thought I didn't know. But the truth was burning inside me, clawing at my ribs, demanding to be let out. I wanted to tell her I knew. I wanted to throw the photos onto the table and watch the color drain from her face. I wanted her to choke on the same betrayal that had been strangling me since last night. But I wasn't going to do that. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, twirling my glass of wine between my fingers, studying her. She was too comfortable, too relaxed. She had no idea that the game had changed. You know, I said, my voice casual, we should go away this weekend. Claire paused, looking up at me, surprised. Go away? Yeah, I nodded. Just the two of us. Somewhere quiet. Maybe the cabin up north? She hesitated for just a second, just long enough for me to see the wheels turning in her mind, calculating. She was weighing her options, wondering if she could get out of it. I don't know, she said finally, offering a small, apologetic smile. Work has been crazy lately. I might have to put in some extra hours. Liar. I smiled, pretending not to notice. That's too bad. I was really looking forward to some alone time with you. Something flickered across her face. Guilt? Annoyance? I couldn't tell. Maybe another weekend, she offered. I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my wine. Yeah, another weekend. I let the conversation drift after that, let her think I had accepted her excuse. But inside, I was screaming. She couldn't even pretend to want to spend time with me. She couldn't even lie properly. She had no idea I was already 2 steps ahead of her. That night, as she slept beside me, her breathing slow and steady, I made my next move. I had taken her phone earlier while she was in the shower, just long enough to send myself the messages between her and him. I had read every single word, every filthy little secret she had whispered to him when she thought I wasn't looking. And now, I had his number. I stared at it on my screen, my thumb hovering over the call button. I could call him right now. Wake him up, tell him exactly who I was, exactly what I had seen. But that would be too easy. No, I wanted to see his face. I wanted to look him in the eye. So I sent him a text instead. Meet me. Tomorrow night. The bar on 8th. We need to talk. Don't make me come find you. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. He would know. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the nightstand, then turned to look at Claire. She was so peaceful, so content, wrapped in the warmth of our bed. She had no idea that by tomorrow night, her whole world would come crashing down. The day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, pretending like everything was fine. Like I wasn't carrying the weight of Claire's betrayal in my chest like a burning coal. She kissed me before she left for work, smiling like she always did, playing the part of the devoted wife with such ease it made me sick. I watched her drive away, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Tonight, everything would change. I spent the afternoon preparing, going through every detail, making sure nothing would slip through the cracks. I printed out the texts, the photos, every single piece of evidence that proved Claire had turned our marriage into a joke. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized he wasn't the only one she was lying to. And then, I waited. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, my heart was steady, my mind razor-sharp. The bar on 8th wasn't anything special. Dim lighting, old wooden floors, the scent of whiskey lingering in the air. A place for men to drown their sorrows in silence. It was perfect. I took a seat in the far corner, facing the entrance, nursing a drink I didn't plan to finish. My fingers drummed against the table as I scanned the room, waiting, watching. Then, he walked in. I knew it was him the second I saw him. He had that look about him. The kind of arrogance that came with knowing he could take what he wanted without consequence. He was tall, confident, the type of guy who had never questioned his place in the world. I hated him on sight. His eyes searched the bar, cautious. He was expecting someone, but he didn't know who. I let him sweat for a moment before I stood and approached him. Looking for someone? I asked, my voice even. His eyes flicked to mine, confusion flickering across his face. Yeah, I got a message. That was me. I watched the realization dawn, slow and creeping, like a shadow stretching across his face. He knew. He fucking knew. Who are you? He asked, but I could hear it in his voice, the uncertainty, the first cracks in his confidence. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and placed it on the bar between us. One by one, I swiped through the pictures. Claire walking into the hotel. Claire kissing him. Claire smiling, her hands wrapped around his collar like she belonged to him. His face paled. You didn't know about me, did you? I asked, tilting my head, watching him closely. You thought you were the only one. He swallowed hard, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Look, man. Don't. I cut him off. I don't care what you have to say. You can give me some bullshit apology, tell me you didn't mean for this to happen, but none of that changes what's already done. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. I swear, I didn't know she was married. I believed him, and I hated that I did, because it meant Claire had played him too. How long? I asked, my voice low, steady. He hesitated, and that hesitation was enough to make my stomach turn. For months, he admitted. For months. For 4 fucking months, she had been doing this. Lying to me. Lying to him. Coming home to me, kissing me, telling me she loved me, while sneaking off to fuck another man. I should have punched him. I should have slammed his face into the bar and made him feel even a fraction of the pain clawing its way through my chest. But he wasn't the one I wanted to hurt. He wasn't the one who had looked me in the eyes and promised forever. I picked up my phone and tucked it back into my pocket. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to disappear from her life. Block her, delete her number, vanish. And if she ever contacts you again, you tell me. He nodded slowly. And what about you? What are you gonna do? I smiled. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't kind. I'm going to make her regret every single second of this. I left him standing there, his face pale, his hands shaking. He had been played, just like I had. But I wasn't going to be just another fool in Claire's little game. No, I was going to be the one who ended it. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. I was beyond anger now, beyond pain. There was only focus, sharp and precise. The conversation with him, Daniel, that was his name. It didn't matter anymore. He was just another player in Claire's twisted little game. A pawn, just like I had been. But I wasn't a pawn anymore. I was the one holding the board. Claire thought she was untouchable. Thought she could live 2 lives, balancing them like plates in a circus act. She had no idea that I was about to smash them to the ground. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was already there. The lights inside the house glowed warmly, like everything was normal, like nothing had changed. I sat there for a moment, watching the window, watching the silhouette of the woman who had lied to me. She moved around the kitchen, humming a tune, setting plates on the table. Setting my plate on the table. I clenched my jaw and stepped out of the car, moving slowly, deliberately. As soon as I walked in, the smell of dinner wrapped around me. Something rich, something familiar. She had cooked my favorite meal. The irony made me want to laugh. "Hey, baby," she called from the kitchen. "You're home just in time. I made lasagna." I forced a smile as I walked in, watching her glide across the kitchen in her silk blouse, her hair perfectly pinned back. She looked like the perfect wife, the devoted woman who had spent her evening thinking of me. She had no idea that only an hour ago, I had been sitting across from the man who had been inside her. I loosened my tie and leaned against the counter. "Long day?" I asked. She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "You have no idea. Rebecca's been all over me with these last-minute reports. I swear, that woman loves to watch me suffer. She lied so easily, so effortlessly. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed her, might have kissed her forehead and told her to relax, that she deserved a break. Instead, I nodded, keeping my expression unreadable. "Lasagna smells great," I said, pulling out a chair. "Let's eat." We sat across from each other, our dinner plates between us, a bottle of wine open, 2 glasses filled. She laughed, told me a funny story about a coworker, reached across the table to brush my hand. She had no idea. Not yet. Halfway through dinner, I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. She glanced at it briefly before looking back at me. "Everything okay?" I tilted my head. "You tell me." Her smile wavered. "What do you mean?" I took my time, sipping my wine, watching her over the rim of my glass. She was nervous now. I could see the slight shift in her shoulders, the way she suddenly seemed a little too focused on her food. I unlocked my phone and tapped the screen once. The first photo appeared. Claire stepping out of the hotel. I didn't say a word. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Her eyes darted to the screen, then to me. I swiped. The next photo. Claire kissing him. She inhaled sharply, her fingers tightening around the stem of her wine glass. I swiped again. Claire smiling up at him, her hands on his chest, her body pressed against his. The silence stretched between us like a noose, tightening with every passing second. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. And then, "Jason," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I set the phone down and leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "How long?" Her lips parted, her face pale. She hesitated. Wrong move. I leaned in further, my voice low, sharp. "Don't you fucking lie to me, Claire." "How long?" Her eyes filled with tears. "For months," she whispered. I closed my eyes for a second. I had already known, of course, but hearing it from her, hearing her admit it, it cut deeper than I expected. I took a slow breath, opened my eyes, and met her gaze. She was crying now, shaking her head. "Jason, I swear, I never meant to." I laughed, a cold, humorless laugh that made her flinch. "Never meant to?" I echoed. "You never meant to, Claire? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you meant every single second of it." Her breath hitched. "It was a mistake." I slammed my fist against the table, making the glasses shake. "Stop saying that." She gasped, startled, eyes wide. I stood up, shoving my chair back. "A mistake is forgetting your keys. A mistake is saying the wrong name in a conversation. What you did, what you've been doing for months, that's not a mistake, Claire. That's a choice." She covered her mouth with her hands, sobbing now, shaking her head violently. "I love you, Jason. Please. Don't," I snapped. "Don't you fucking say that. You don't get to say that to me. Not after everything." Her shoulders trembled. "Please," she whispered again. "Please don't leave." I stared at her, the woman I had spent years loving, the woman I had built my life around. And for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing. I picked up my phone, pocketed it, and walked to the door. She scrambled to her feet. "Jason, please. Where are you going?" I paused, gripping the doorknob, and glanced over my shoulder to decide what happens next. Then I walked out, leaving her sobs behind me. I drove through the city with no destination in mind, the streetlights blurring into streaks of gold and white as I pushed the speed limit. My hands were steady on the wheel, my breathing even, but my mind was a storm. Claire's voice still echoed in my ears, the desperate way she had begged, the way her tears had fallen freely once she realized she had been caught. I should have felt something, rage, sorrow, regret, but there was only emptiness. I had spent years loving her, trusting her, believing that we were a team, and all along, she had been sleeping with another man, feeding me lies with the same lips she kissed him with. And now, what? Did she think she could cry her way out of this? That a few whispered apologies would be enough to erase 4 months of betrayal? No, I wasn't looking for closure. I wasn't looking for forgiveness. I was looking for justice. After an hour of driving, I finally pulled into a nearly empty parking lot. A small, run-down motel sat at the edge of the lot, its neon sign flickering weakly. It wasn't my usual kind of place, but I wasn't here for comfort. I just needed space. I checked in under a fake name, paid in cash, and locked myself in the room, the stench of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener pressing down on me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the texts Claire had sent Daniel. She hadn't contacted him since our dinner. Good. He had listened. He had done exactly what I told him to do, disappear. But Claire was still sitting in our house, still crying into her hands, still thinking this was something she could fix. She had no idea that I was about to take away the one thing she never expected to lose, control. I opened my laptop, logged into our shared accounts, and got to work. First, the bank accounts. We had a joint account, but I had my own personal one too. Quietly, I began moving money out of the joint and into mine. Not all of it, just enough to make sure she couldn't drain it before I was ready. Then, the house. Our names were both on the lease, but I had spoken to our landlord enough times to know that if one tenant wanted to break the contract, they could do it alone, as long as they paid the penalty. I could leave tomorrow if I wanted to. Claire would never see it coming. Finally, the phone bill. We were on the same plan, which meant I had access to everything. Her calls, her texts, even her location history. I had proof of every place she had been, every time she had disappeared for her so-called yoga class. I took screenshots, saving them. I didn't know why yet. Maybe because deep down, I wanted her to see. I wanted her to understand that she wasn't the one in control anymore. That for the first time in months, maybe years, I held all the power. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, I would go back. Tomorrow, I would decide how this ended. But tonight, I would let her sit in that empty house, wondering where I was, wondering if she had finally lost me. I wanted her to feel it. I wanted her to understand what it meant to be alone. I didn't go home the next morning. I let Claire sit in that house alone, drowning in her guilt, waiting for me to walk through the door and tell her what came next. I wanted her to suffer in the silence, to feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her, like I had felt it pressing down on me for months. Instead, I drove to my lawyer's office. I hadn't told anyone what was happening yet. Not my family, not my friends. But I wasn't here to talk. I was here to end this. The receptionist gave me a polite smile as I stepped inside. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but I need to speak to someone about filing for divorce." The words tasted strange coming out of my mouth, like they belonged to someone else. But at the same time, they felt right. The lawyer, David, was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a calculating mind. He had seen cases like mine before. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. "What's the situation?" he asked as we sat across from each other. I pulled out my phone and placed it on his desk. One by one, I showed him the photos. Claire with Daniel. Claire leaving the hotel. Claire betraying me over and over again. David nodded, flipping through a notepad. "Do you have proof of financial misconduct? Has she been using marital funds for the affair?" I thought about the dinners, the hotels, the little gifts I had seen on our credit card statements, purchases she had always shrugged off as things for work. I nodded. "Yes." "Good," David said. "That'll make things easier." He started laying out my options. How to file. How to protect my assets. How to ensure that Claire walked away with nothing. I listened carefully, memorizing every word. By the time I left the office, I had a plan. And Claire? Claire had no idea her world was about to collapse. I drove home in the afternoon, pulling into the driveway like it was just another day. My heart was steady. My mind was clear. Claire was inside. I could see her silhouette through the curtains, pacing the living room. She had been waiting. Good. I stepped inside, and the second the door opened, she rushed toward me, eyes swollen from crying, hands shaking. Jason. I held up a hand, cutting her off. She froze. I walked past her, tossing my keys on the counter, moving through the house like I didn't see the way she was falling apart. I sat on the couch, leaned back, exhaled slowly. Then, finally, I looked at her. I spoke to a lawyer today, I said, my voice calm. Claire inhaled sharply, her face crumbling. Jason, please. I tilted my head. Please what? She swallowed, tears spilling down her cheeks. Don't do this. Don't throw us away. I laughed. A short, bitter sound. Throw us away? I echoed. Claire, you threw us away the second you walked into that hotel room. She was shaking now, her whole body trembling. I'll do anything, she whispered. I'll cut him off. I'll prove to you that I love you. Just give me a chance to fix this. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. You don't get to fix this, I said coldly. You don't get to rewrite the story and pretend that 4 months of lying never happened. She sobbed. Jason, I know everything, I interrupted. I know the nights you were with him. I know how many times you called him. I know exactly how long you've been making a fool out of me. Her knees buckled, and she grabbed onto the arm of the couch for support. I should have felt something. Pity, sadness, anything. But there was nothing left. Just resolve. I grabbed a manila envelope from the coffee table and tossed it onto the couch beside her. These are the divorce papers, I said. Sign them. Her breath hitched. Jason, please. I don't love you anymore, I said, my voice sharp, final. She stared at me, eyes wide, as if I had just stabbed her in the heart. But she had done it first, and I was just making sure the blade went in deep. I turned and walked toward the door, my chest feeling lighter with every step. Behind me, Claire sobbed, begging, breaking. But I didn't stop. She had already lost me, and I wasn't coming back. Claire didn't sign the papers. I wasn't surprised. When I walked out that night, I expected her to crumble, to finally realize that she had lost. But Claire wasn't the type to accept defeat so easily. I should have known she would fight. I should have known she would try to find a way to manipulate the situation. One last desperate attempt to keep control. And sure enough, the next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls and texts. Claire, Jason, please, just talk to me. Claire, I can't believe you're doing this. Claire, you're making a mistake. You don't understand. I still love you. Claire, please don't do this to us. Us. Like we still existed. Like she hadn't destroyed everything with her lies. I ignored the texts, deleted them one by one, and went about my day. I packed my bags. I had already arranged to stay in an apartment across town, a temporary place until everything was finalized. By noon, I was ready to leave. But as I stepped out of the house for what I thought would be the last time, Claire was standing at the end of the driveway, waiting. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair disheveled like she hadn't slept. Jason, she breathed, taking a hesitant step forward. Please, just hear me out. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to say anything. She wrung her hands, her body trembling. I know I hurt you, she said softly. I know I made a mistake, but... I laughed, shaking my head. A mistake? Claire, 4 months isn't a mistake. It's a choice. Over and over again. She flinched but didn't back down. I love you, she whispered, her voice cracking. I still love you. I stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. Then I tilted my head. You love me? I asked. Yes, she said desperately. Yes, Jason, I do. I took a slow step toward her. Then tell me something, I said, my voice even. Tell me his name. Claire's face went pale. I watched the war in her eyes, The way she panicked, scrambling for an answer, for a way to twist the truth into something she could still control. But there was no control anymore. I leaned in, my voice barely above a whisper. You can't even say it, can you? Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. I turned away, walked past her, got into my car. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg her to understand what she had done. I was just done. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Claire didn't stop trying. For the next few days, she called, texted, left voicemails that started with apologies and ended with desperation. I ignored all of them. She had already taken too much of my time, my trust, my love. I wasn't going to give her anything else. But Claire wasn't the kind of woman who gave up easily. On the 5th night after I left, I came home to find her standing outside my apartment building, wrapped in her coat, shivering in the cold. She had been waiting for me. I exhaled slowly, gripping my keys tighter as I approached her. You shouldn't be here, I said. She stepped forward, eyes red-rimmed, filled with something between regret and determination. I had to see you. I didn't respond. She looked at me like she was searching for something, a weakness, a way back in. I can't believe you just walked away, she whispered. After everything. I let out a short, humorless laugh. You mean after everything you did? She winced but didn't back down. Jason, you know what the worst part is? I interrupted, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. It's not even the fact that you cheated. It's the lies. The fact that you looked me in the eye, night after night, and pretended everything was fine. She opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. You didn't love me, I said. Not really. Because if you did, you never would have done this. Tears streamed down her face, and for the first time, I saw fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of what she had become. I stepped past her, unlocking my door. Don't come here again. Jason, please, she choked out. I don't know what to do without you. I turned back, meeting her eyes one last time. You should have thought of that before you threw me away. I shut the door in her face. And this time, I didn't look back. Claire finally gave up. The texts stopped. The calls went silent. She didn't show up at my apartment again. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I threw myself into work, into the gym, into anything that kept me moving forward. The anger wasn't gone. It would take time, but it wasn't consuming me anymore. And then, just when I thought I was done with her, life threw one last twist my way. I was out with some friends, trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy, when I saw her. Claire. But she wasn't alone. She was sitting at a table across the bar, her head tilted back in laughter, her hand resting lightly on the arm of the man next to her. And I knew him. Daniel. The same man she had cheated on me with. My stomach tightened, but not with pain. Not with regret. With amusement. Because of course, she had gone back to him. The man she had sworn meant nothing. The man she had cried over losing. I watched them for a moment, the way she leaned into him, the way he looked at her, like he was still under whatever spell she had cast. But I knew better. I knew exactly how this would end. She hadn't changed. She never would. And Daniel? He thought he had one. But he had just taken my place in a losing game. I smiled, turned back to my friends, and lifted my drink. To new beginnings. To being free. Claire was nothing more than a ghost now. She existed in my past, a fading memory of a life I had already left behind. The pain, the anger, the betrayal, once sharp enough to cut through bone, had dulled into something distant, almost insignificant. I didn't love her anymore. I didn't hate her either. She was just someone I used to know. The divorce was finalized within a few weeks. She had tried to fight for more, for some shred of control, but the evidence I had, the photos, the texts, the financial records proving she had used our joint money for her affair, shut that down fast. She walked away with nothing. Not the house. Not my money. Not me. I had thought that getting the papers, seeing the official end of our marriage in black and white, would feel like a victory, that I would feel some final sense of justice. But the truth? It just felt like relief. No more lies. No more second-guessing. Just freedom. Months passed. I rebuilt. New apartment. New routines. New life. I started going out more, letting myself breathe again. There was a moment, a fleeting one, where I had wondered if I'd ever trust someone again, if I'd ever let anyone close enough to hurt me like Claire had. And then, one night, I met someone. It wasn't dramatic. There was no grand love story waiting to unfold, no overwhelming force pulling us together. She was just real. She smiled at me across a coffee shop, and I smiled back. That was it. No weight, no baggage, no expectations, just a moment. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something simple: hope. The end. If you like this story, please like and subscribe to the channel.